All right, so this is Two Turns Forward. Molly inhaled deeply and gripped her pencil, focusing on the final three math problems of her homework assignment. She had to get this done quickly so she could write the history report that was due tomorrow. At this rate, she was never going to finish her homework, especially since Uncle Jonathan was coming over for dinner. Evenings with Uncle Jonathan were always her favorites. He was full of good stories, especially about when he and her dad were children, and he talked to Molly no differently than he talked to adults. But before he could launch into an after-dinner tale, Molly's mom reminded her about the schoolwork waiting for her upstairs. Molly sighed, and as she headed toward her room, Uncle Jonathan slipped a small parcel into her hand. "Good luck," he smiled, as he hugged her briefly. She eagerly accepted the package and hurried into her room to unwrap it. It was a woman's gold pocket watch, the type you would expect to find at a flea market or antique store. Molly flopped into her desk chair mildly disappointed. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but it wasn't a pocket watch. Turning it over in her palm, she spotted a tiny inscription that read, "Two turns forward, rush the hour, 3 turns back, slow times power." Molly fiddled with the knob that turned the hands, but neither of the hands moved. She laid the watch on her desk and resumed working. The last 3 problems were particularly difficult, taking even longer than the first 7. She glanced at her alarm clock as she finished, realizing that only 10 minutes had passed. Molly looked at her homework, looked back at her clock, and finally at the pocket watch sitting next to her math book. She turned the knob toward her twice, took a deep breath, and looked at the alarm clock again. The bright red numbers ticked by rapidly, minutes flashing past as quickly as seconds. She turned the knob 3 times in the opposite direction and watched as the alarm clock's numbers slowed to a snail's pace. How interesting. The pocket watch was somehow controlling her alarm clock. Molly eyed the small timepiece and reached for her history book. Even though she'd had the assignment for weeks, she once again found herself scrambling to write an entire paper in just a few hours. She wanted to play with the watch some more, but she couldn't afford to put off her assignment any longer. Hours later, Molly stood up to stretch. Her report was done, but she was exhausted. She reached over to set her alarm clock for the next morning and saw that the time was wrong. The clock said it was 8:30, but that was impossible. Molly had written a 3-page paper. There was no way it had taken only an hour. She ran downstairs and checked the clocks on the microwave and on the DVD player. Both cheerfully agreed that it was now 8:31. Molly flew back to her bedroom. The pocket watch didn't control the alarm clock. It controlled time. She snuggled into her pillow as her small smile grew into a wide grin. This changed everything. The next morning, Molly gave the pocket watch 3 turns backward and lazily strolled through her morning routine. She was the first one at the bus stop, so she pulled the pocket watch out of her backpack and turned the knob forward 3 times. Within minutes, the rest of the neighborhood children arrived, followed by the school bus. Molly sat down next to her friend Kai and reached into the front pocket of the backpack to secretly give the watch 2 turns forward. They arrived to school in the blink of an eye. Molly used the watch to make sure she'd had enough time to finish a surprise quiz in science class and sped up a particularly slow language arts lesson. After school, she and Kai met and sat together on the school bus for the ride home. "Have you figured out which book you're going to choose for your book report?" Kai asked as Molly lowered her backpack to the floor. Molly frowned. "We have to do a book report?" Kai looked confused. "Don't you remember? We spent most of language arts going over the assignment." Molly shook her head. Her memories of language arts were a blur. She flipped through her assignment folder to see if she had taken any notes and spotted a handout from class. "Oh yeah, now I remember," she said, shoving the folder into her backpack. "Thanks for reminding me." Molly reread the homework assignment when she got home to refresh her memory, but shrugged and decided to deal with it after dinner. Dinner, however, got off to a bad start when her older sister started complaining about her day. Molly reached into her pocket to turn the little gold knob forward, and she was back in her room before she knew it. She considered starting her homework, but what was the rush? She had all the time in the world. She turned the knob backward and settled into her bed with the latest novel in her favorite series. Molly yawned as she put down the book and looked at the clock. She had been reading for what seemed like hours, but only 30 minutes had passed. She still had most of the night ahead of her, but now she was too tired to even think about doing homework. She decided to get up early the next morning to get everything done. The next morning came faster than Molly expected. She must have turned the watch too far forward before she went to sleep because no matter how many times she hit the snooze button, her alarm buzzed steadily. She felt like she hadn't slept at all, but quickly became alert when her mom poked her head around the door. "Molly, why aren't you ready to go? I told you last night at dinner you have a dentist appointment before school. You're not even out of bed yet," she huffed. Molly sprang into action, throwing on a pair of jeans and a sweater. She didn't have time to do her hair or eat breakfast, much less do her homework. Sweeping her folders and notebooks into her backpack, she paused to look at the little gold pocket watch before dropping it into an unpaired sock and stowing it in the back of her pajama drawer. Maybe playing with time wasn't such a good idea after all.